So how do you define a symbol? What does that mean for a brand?
So I think symbol comes from Greek symbole, which means bringing together, and it's interestingly enough, it's the opposite of devil, diaboli.
Oh, wow. First of all, for any young designer out there, apparently you need to start jump skiing. Um, what is branding to you?
For me, it's the array of symbolical tools that a company uses to translate its product into a message.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Brand and Psychology. Today, I have a really cool guest with me. I've been meaning to talk to him for quite a while. Stefano is a PhD student at Sorbonne Nouvelle, but next to his academic experience, he also works as the senior global brand manager at Red Bull. And so, talking to him obviously has been one of my sort of very much wants for quite a long time. So, Stefano, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm very much looking forward to learning from you and talking to you today.
Good morning, Leon. Good morning from here in Austria, close to Salzburg, where I'm connected from. And I was very touched by your words on LinkedIn. I'm very happy to be here and to speak to your audience about branding, psychology, and digital world.
Well, I was so once we started talking, you mentioned your thesis, which is media and environment, dynamics and operations between worlds, and I mean, almost everything about that sort of gets me going. And then I read the abstract, and then you also mentioned Marshall McLuhan and all of these sort of figures that have influenced me for like the longest of time. So, but before I jump into all that, because I'll get super excited, can you just maybe introduce yourself, tell me more about your experience? From someone who's been in the branding world for a long time, I know how difficult it is to climb sort of the ladder to that position that you're in, but at the same time, do all of these studies all in parallel. So I'd love to know more about just like your experience. How did you get to where you are today? For all the younger designers listening, maybe they'll see this as an inspiration as well. So I'd love to hear that from you.
For sure. So perhaps I can start exactly from design, because I am, from my undergraduate studies, a designer as well. I was studying design und Kunst, so design and arts, at the Free University of Bozen, where I spent 3 very good years. And during these years, I was jumping a lot with my skis. I was a free skier, and I met a Red Bull athlete whose name is Markus Eder, who told me about the possibility to work for Red Bull during my studies as a student marketeer, which is a very interesting role that Red Bull offers. And long story short, this was my step into the company, which happened through sports, and as you know, is one, of course, of a distinctive way to communicate of Red Bull. And ever since, so this was 2013, I had different positions from student marketeer to field marketing intern in Milano in Red Bull Italy. And then I jumped over to Austria, where I worked as a brand specialist, then brand manager, and then I opened up my little function here, which is dealing with branding and corporate identity, so the way in which the brand is represented and builds its own identity across worlds. And this position I hold it now since 4 years. And you mentioned rightly that I always had a bit of an academic journey next to these years at Red Bull. And this probably has been because I started to work quite early, directly after my undergraduate. And the passion and fascination towards cultural studies and thinkers never stopped. So I did my master while working in Switzerland at the European Graduate School, a really cool reality that I strongly recommend. And then I'm doing a PhD thesis under the supervision of Professor Francesco Casetti and Professor Antonio Somaini, and it has been another great journey so far. So this is a bit the journey and the experience. Of course, what is really arising at the moment, it's the fascination to understand how we can transport cultural phenomena between digital worlds or brands. And what I'm focusing on in my thesis, of course, has synergies between what I see at work and what are my theoretical interests.
Well, I'll take it. First of all, for any young designer out there, apparently you need to start jump skiing. Um, just to put it out there so that you know it's been said. There you go. But because a lot
But I
of
mean,
this
you would be
conversation,
surprised. In the free skiing communities, there are amazing illustrators, and if you look at their events, you also learn a lot. But no, like that's sometimes when life is really unexpected, because I was just following a passion more than I'm from Bergamo. I could have gone to the Politecnico of Milano, which is another great center for designers, but I decided to go to Bolzano in Südtirol, following my heart, so following a big passion I had and a sport interest. And then this opened up, of course, getting closer to German and to Red Bull, and in the end shaped my career.
yeah, I mean, it's incredible how we sort of this aspect of intuition in shaping our future, so to speak. Maybe not even intuition; it's just like aspects of chance and passion combined together. Yeah, I just had a conversation with a client of mine yesterday, in respect to like, well, they're starting a school, and how far along does philosophy should philosophy play a role in installing a completely new school? And then all of a sudden we jumped into this aspect of like, oh, passion and all these even religious aspect, like how do these combine in today's world? And it's incredible to see how these very insanely insignificant aspects of our lives tend to shape some of the most important ones in our lives. And so that's certainly something that it's worth exploring even further. But on your answer though, you did mention a lot, and like you talked a lot about brand, right? It's been part of your professional life for a very long period of time. And I talked to a lot of marketers and designers, and almost every one of them gives me a different um, aspect of what brand is, or at least a different sort of sentence of what they use as the main sort of umbrella term of what a brand is. So, what is branding to you?
For me, it's the array of symbolical tools that a company uses to translate its product into a message. And this goes from visual tools, of course, logos, colors, fonts, and everything we know, to meaning tools like a claim, the copies that we use, Red Bull gives you wings for my profession, to sounds. If you think at MasterCard, when you pay, you often hear a corporate sound which connects you to the world of the brand. So in the end, they are a set of tools that are at disposal of the company after that we built it, in order to install a lot of operations between all of the context where a product can be purchased or utilized, and their own identity or realm. Yeah, I think that would be my answer here.
There's something very interesting, in fact. You mentioned the word symbol, and I think the word symbol is very packed. Looking back, I think Carl Jung, I'd read a piece from him a while ago, and he goes in length about what a symbol actually means. If my memory serves correctly, he speaks of it of something like a symbol is an image that always entails something that is hidden and we cannot completely see. So, how do you define a symbol? What does that mean for a brand? I think that's very fascinating, actually, and I've never had this answer, so I need to drill a little deeper in this.
Sure. I will start maybe thinking at the etymological roots of symbol, which is always helpful. So I think symbol comes from Greek symbole, which means bringing together. And it's interestingly enough, it's the opposite of devil, diaboli, which is.
Oh, wow.
So in its etymological roots, symbol is the opposite of devil. And going to Latin then, because this was Greek, religion has something similar. Religion means also bringing together. So religion and symbol have a bit of a common meaning in the etymology. I think for a brand, a symbol is again an instrument to bring the practical and product-based identity of a company together with its metaphorical translation. So I think it's it's a link in the end. It's a link between what the brand desires to be perceived as and what in the end it really is. Of course, successful branding creates a solid link, a link which is justified by logic, by functionality, and that can be experienced when you use the product. Because if you create a symbol which divides instead of unites, because you sell something as, I don't know, black, but in the end it's a yellow, then it wouldn't function.
But then, is there then a religious sort of bypass to the experience of the brand itself? Can we is there a correlation between these? If a symbol is somewhat sort of, there's a connection between a symbol and a religion, and then at the same time we're using symbols for the brand, is there any correlation between these two, or are these two completely different? I mean, one could argue that building communities around a brand and believing in the same set of values serves as a religion, somewhat similar to what Yuval Noah Harari would somewhat mention
Yeah.
in his books. But how would you draw a parallel there, or is that too broad of a parallel to draw?
No, I mean, of course, layout. I will stay away from these theological um, reflections now. But once I read an article, I think it was actually from a priest who tried to describe a few elements of Christianity as instruments of branding. And I remember, because this is true, I think about it so often. So the church towers, and so which in Italian is called campanile, is the tower on which there is the bell, and it back in the time, I think still now in some of the towns, the bell rings every time a new hour. So when it's a complete hour, it rings, and this, let's look into it as a branding tool. It's very high, so you see it from a lot of places in the town. It's functional because it tells you acoustically and visually what time is it. It symbolically it makes sense because it makes you looking up, which in the context of religions means looking to a connection with what you believe in, and it's also with a sound variable. Even if you're not looking at it and you're working in your office or whatever, you hear it, and it constantly reminds you that it exists. So it was a very beautiful comparison between an element that, of course, had also has especially other functions related to believing, but that it can also be seen under as a configured this like branding element for Christianity, which has a lot of plus and positive aspects about branding. So it's functional; it tells you what time it is. Symbolically, it makes sense. Super visible and premium, because some of them, if I think at Gothic church towers, are also very beautiful simply. So it's, of course, you can build a comparison, but I think we have so many brands out there that it's more helpful to look into brandings of companies rather than focusing on this possible connection to religion. Of course, although, as I said before, between symbol and religion there is a similarity in the words.
Absolutely agree, and in the sense that, you know, there is some sense of connection, but at the same time, yeah, for me, it's just important that we do actually have these conversations, and I think you bringing this forward is such a powerful aspect, because any marketer, any brand designer that goes out there, what we're creating has an impact to the world, and it's not necessarily only commercial. And so we just need to be aware of it. How far along we go in which direction, because correlations of branding and human psychology are there in so many levels, right? It could be, in this case, we were talking about the religious aspect, could be just about mental well-being, all of these other aspects that touch on our lives. But it's absolutely fascinating, and I would love to, if you could, then share that sort of paper with me. I'd love to read that in thorough detail. But you've had this experience with a global brand, so you know the work that you do touches millions and millions of people across the globe, and I dare say like a fair share of the human population today. Can you share with me some of your favorite campaigns, or like the piece of work or activation that you've been sort of that you've worked with, so that people can kind of hear about those experiences from someone that has an impact in the whole sort of globe at the same time?
Sure. So as you say, Red Bull is globally known, and I think what fascinates me every day at work is how simple the narrative and the identity of Red Bull is, and nonetheless how much you can replicate it and tell it to many different audiences and groups of people, and it always delivers something new or surprise consumers. I think what I've learned a lot in the years here, compared to especially what I've seen at the design faculty, is to always listen to the needs of the people you're speaking to, instead of looking at your canvas and developing something that you or the design trends that you are aware of suggest to you as a good solution. Because of course many of the things that you see out there from big brands and companies, they might, let's be honest with our designer eyes, they might not be sophisticated. Sometimes we might define them rough or just sketched or not well done, or old-fashioned from our designer eyes. However, when you speak to masses and to everyone, you really need to put in the you kind of need to put the glasses on, which helps you to speak to everyone and decrease a bit your let's say accuracy in making aesthetic details or abstractions so minimal as design sometimes in the latest trends requires. And a campaign that I really liked, I will speak about Red Bull BC1, which is a breaking competition that Red Bull organizes since 20 plus years. So breaking is a dance discipline or culture, to say it probably more precisely, which was born in the 80s in New York, where a lot of communities of black people were gathering in certain districts, putting a cardboard, like sort of paper on the street and dancing on it, creating some circles of people called ciphers around the dancers, and then they were showing a mix of dance moves and really athletics moves, accompanied by an MC and a DJ. It's a discipline that comes from hip hop and from specific cultures in the US. And in 2022, the World Final was in New York, and I worked on the campaign where we had to build a balance between the requirements of the community of breakers, which of course it was born in New York in the 80s, so they had a strong legacy in the city, and what Red Bull is bringing, so the most prestigious World Final in New York. And we created a key visual where you see a photo of coming from the 80s, which kind of extends on the right side of the visual to a photo from a Red Bull event. And it was a campaign that really managed to build a relation between the expectation of an external culture or community and the needs of a global brand. And it also gave justice and bared witness to what Red Bull has done for over 20 years into the breaking scene. I mean, in 2024, in a few months in Paris at the Olympic Games, breaking will be a discipline at the Olympics for the first time in history. And I mean, Red Bull has been, of course, a tangential part, but it helped to make it more, to democratize it, to make it more available for more people. And this was a nice campaign, because when I went to the World Final then, and I could hear from so many breakers that they liked the way in which we built a dialogue between the outside and the inside.
So this is, well, I mean, it obviously is incredible for me because we've done a couple of brand strategies here where one of them in particular that comes to mind is, you know, we brought in a brand for the whole western region of the country, and we managed to go as far as changing the policies of several sort of municipalities. And it changes, like once that is fully implemented, it literally changes the whole dynamics of a full region. But what you're talking about is taking a small, so that is like a culture for that specific culture, a change for that specific culture within that specific sort of bubble, so to speak. In this case, you've taken a subculture, if I may, and then brought it to a global stage. um, but you mention it from like this poster and the photo of the 80s. So I would love to first talk about this from the designer's perspective and then maybe go to a more broad cultural perspective. Can you share the process of how you come up with something like that? Meaning, you choose that particular picture. Why? How does someone in your position come to these decisions? If I were in your position, or if a sort of younger designer or a younger Stefano was in this position, what would you have liked for someone to tell you to say, for this to be successful, or like for this to be kind of properly made, here's the steps that I've taken? And so, how would you describe that process, the research, maybe the stylistic as well as visual, and other elements within the choices within those elements that you've made, and how did it come about to be such a big movement?
Yeah, I'm just taking notes for a second. 1 second. So, I mean, thanks for the question. And I think I am thinking at what will be my tips for such a process to come to life. The first one might sound really basic, but it's really to listen. So, when you are working on a creative project, speak to everybody who is involved and listen to what are their ambitions, their preoccupations, their wishes. If you listen carefully and just translate visually what you have heard from the outside, then you really manage to make solutions that take into account every perspective around what you are creating. So when you do a campaign for a subculture like Red Bull BC1 or like breaking, in the end, you just need to listen a lot to the people that are really at the center or at the core of this culture. And then you will understand what are the elements of the culture that are very distinctive and unique, and that they are very close to their hearts. Subcultures like action sports, breaking, hip hop. I mean, these I really say it with intimate relationship to it, because I love the free skiing culture so much that I know how much creative power each one of these community has. They sometimes it feels they have the same energy and vibrance like the avant-gardes at the beginning of the 20th century. And this is really an idea that I have in me. But if you follow a bit of pages related to this, you will see they develop a new language. They have their aesthetic values, and if you listen into that, you will find infinite opportunities to start from a little element we mentioned and make it become, let's say, the center of your campaign. And for breaking it's of course the street, because it's a culture made from the streets to the streets, and it's dancing together and kind of, it's like a rite. It's not just the person or the dancers on the stage, but everybody around contributes to what is happening. And sometimes being at a breaking event reminds of when Levi Strauss was doing his anthropological researches and had to go to subcultures studying their rites, their like ways to get together and celebrate something beyond the ordinary and the everyday life. It's like breaking is a bit like this. It creates a circle and a situation for something unusual, playful yet serious to happen. So the first tip will be to listen, and the second, which I already expanded a bit on, is to get excited about what you are trying to depict. So be excited about the subject of your campaign or the topic of your communication strategy, because you are the first one that needs to be proud of what you're doing, and only by loving, in this case, both the parts that you are trying to combine, you will get to a campaign which will travel online. And I mean, I don't need to say to this audience how much authenticity is key. In times where we're used to see a lot of clips from everyone, and it takes us 1 second to understand when something is staged, and then the first comment is just a sarcastic critique on a badly performed, let's say, act. So be real.
Well, I mean, I cannot say that I'm not baffled by this answer from someone who has gone so far into academia, and is still sort of directly tied to the practice and to the aspect of like a global brand. The two key points you mentioned have nothing to do with KPIs, reaching business goals. Um, how do you manage this? Like, how do you manage to reach those business goals, but still only think about sort of being real to oneself? How do you?
To the
This
self
is
to the
like
self of
really
the
challenging.
Yeah. So I think a good point. I think everything you mentioned. So knowing what are the objective of a brand or of a product, knowing what they want to reach, which metrics are utilized to measure success. This is the way in which you configure your designer head and build the algorithm you use in your mind to select what is right and what is wrong. But there are two different moments. In one moment, you structure your head on how do I make decisions, and on the other one, you creatively approach the campaign. And when it's about creativity, KPI is just to make right decisions from your direction and creative view and ambition. And I think there are different moments. Of course, it's not to be true to yourself, but to be true to the identity of the brand. So to be true to the brand in the end. When we look at Red Bull, it took me a while to adapt my designer language that before, and still now, if I do private projects, is inspired by really different sources or references than the one of Red Bull. But when I evaluate a Red Bull campaign, or a Red Bull project, then I put on the glasses of everything you mentioned that needs to be taken in consideration. But then the way in which I approach creativity doesn't change. It's just I change the briefing.
So, well, I do have some students of my own, and so for me, it has been the most. I suppose it's because of the sort of the mindset of the academia where I'm at, that very much sort of pushes these students to kind of explore on the visual aspect, on the very creative aspect, but then they really have a challenge to explain what they're doing, and also like to tie any of that with any sort of business context. And you saying that these are like two different moments, I couldn't agree more. One of these challenges, I think, for young designers especially, but even for marketers on day-to-day basis, and I've had this conversation several times, is how do we like how do we sort of build on these moments? How do we sort of build experience internally on both these moments and don't become just one or the other? It's Yeah, I don't have a question or an answer for this. I'm just saying that these two moments, I think, are key for every person in our industry to really like work on, and almost separately, and then find their way of connecting the two. Otherwise, I find this to be, at least for me, one of the very, very challenging things to teach, but also very challenging things to direct when it comes to my work directly with clients, because it's easy to tell a designer, oh, make it pop, but it's very hard to tell a designer, like, here are the KPIs, but at the same time, I want you to be creative, right? And so it's been very, very, very challenging for me to be able to build this sort of culture and knowledge in the team as well as with the students. So I'm very glad you bring that up, but I do not have an answer as to how to do it. So
Yeah, probably it's one of the things that comes with repetition and trying and trying and trying. I mean, at work, every time, even in the last weeks, there are many projects where you, of course, tend too much to linger on the analytical moment, and sometimes where you get yourself a bit too excited about the creative one. It's a balance. What helps is listening to all of the parties, as I was mentioning before, and diplomatically adjust them into what the brand in the end needs. Of course, as a brand manager, what you need to care is the healthiness and the success of the brand, and this is where you base your ultimate decisions on.
Absolutely. And I'll take a detour because I can't wait to start the conversation about your thesis. Although I did enjoy this one a lot, so I could go on and on. But I think I really want to know more about that thesis, about how you're approaching it. So let me just read the title again, and maybe you can walk us through it just a little bit. I read the abstract. I think it's an incredibly important piece of study that we really need to dive deeper in, especially in the upcoming years. So it's media and environment, dynamics and operations between worlds. What does that mean? And where are you going with this?
Yeah. So let's start from the title, Media and Environments. I think you mentioned at the beginning that you also are familiar with Marshall McLuhan and his book from 1964, Understanding Media. I mean, it's important to start to ground the conversation about media today on the fact that they are not just vehicle for a message, but they build environments. Let's take a parallel to the streets, which I think is used also by McLuhan in the book. So, of course, streets are a medium to connect to places, but what we notice if we look at the maps is that around streets, a town comes to life, different functions of the life of this town are performed. Then there is a gas station, then there is a bar to stop to take a break, then there is the mechanic to adjust the car. So every medium builds an ecosystem around itself and in the end shapes an environment. And I mean, McLuhan noticed that already right after the middle of the last century. But today we cannot but witness how every platform we use build an external or digital environment in which a different form of ecosystem come to life. And when starting to work on the proposition of my thesis, I kept thinking at how can we create a model that tries to explain or at least map the way in which these different worlds that are built by media speak to each other. And I mean, the most simple way to explain the central idea of my work is to take gaming and especially Fortnite as an example. I don't know if the audience knows, but in 2021, DJ Marshmello, the DJ with a marshmallow head, which was very popular. Now I think it's a bit less known. He was invited by Fortnite to organize a concert inside the world of the game during the pandemic, because people could not go to parties, they could not go to festivals, so they wanted to offer players and gamers possibility to socialize and dance. And as you know, Fortnite is about fighting. It's a battle royale game, so it's normally about entering an island, getting weapons, shooting other players until only one is left. But for a moment, a cultural event like a concert has been appropriated by the game. For a couple of hours, more than 11,000 people were together dancing, doing also the typical Fortnite dance moves, and they enjoyed some time together. Conversely, and in the complete opposite direction, you know that the Fortnite dance moves, and there are plenty of them. Many people don't know that they come from Fortnite, but there are a lot of little moves that are done by people in the last years that were originated by the movements of the avatars in Fortnite. And they are taken and exported to many other moments of the world of entertainment, everyday, let's say, leisure occasions with friends and so on. And these are two opposing directions. In one case, it's Fortnite that takes something from the outside. In the other case, it's the outside that takes something from Fortnite. And I think we constantly live into a traffic of these operations, which can be of different kinds. Sometimes things are transported, sometimes they are translated, sometimes they reach an equilibrium where it's kind of an osmosis between the two worlds. And I aim to look at media as worlds, because it's more complex than just an environment. I think it got to even to a next level. And B, try to describe the internal ecosystem. What are the actors? What are the sub-worlds and the sub-creations? What are the environments that we can define? Once you map every word, then what can you say about the operations that these words install with the outside? This is a bit the idea of the thesis I want to write on, and there will be a couple of observation cases, but let's see where it brings me. As you know, a PhD is a journey, and let's see where it will land on.
Absolutely. One of the things that seems to be for me very currently, very abstract, is specifically this bandwidth connection between the digital world and the physical world. It seems as if a certain type of information is constantly received and sort of communicated, right? So, for example, linguistically speaking, I notice myself when I speak to my friends on the phone, I'll use a lot of meme language that I've never seen, or it has nothing to do with like proper English or anything like that. And it seems like that influences behavior. Like if we go, thoughts to words and words to behavior, or to actions, right? But I can't seem to find a pattern or a thread to say these are the typically recurring sort of modes or actions that are being sort of propagated in the real world from the physical world. Is there any sort of, so from your studies so far, is there any sort of theory or thesis around what's sort of sticking and what can we look out for as something that's being easily translated from the digital to the physical world and to human experience?
So the answer, I think, of course, I'm developing the answer while I'm writing and studying the cases of my thesis. My answer would be no. That there is no defined elements that you can, let's say, structure to say these are what gets transported between words and these are things that are not. I mean, let's think at languages. And here I might also refer to a beautiful paper from Yuri Lotman called The Semiosphere, where he compares every language as a sphere of meaning, which has centers and outside, and the outside are always ready for translations to other languages. And of course, your question in this case could be what gets translated between one language and the other. I think in a co-realization of a language happens when there is a need to say something else and you cannot express yourself, and then you need to find a solution. For me, with digital words and external words, it's a bit the same, and I wouldn't see them as an opposition or like there is a window in between that you can open the window or close the window. It's more complex, and whatever an audience, a culture, or a community needs at a certain point or has the urge to translate into another place, then this will be translated. If we think at the pandemic, a beautiful study I did with my professor Francesco Casetti, who worked a lot on protective and projective media in his latest book. I think during the pandemic, there was a mood and, let's say, feelings that were imported into digital worlds. Reddit, you know the medium and platform Reddit, of course, suddenly became, for many people were isolated in confined weeks during the pandemic, a space of socialization and a hotline. Some of them were really suffering from anxiety and the sadness related to being alone and not being able to get outside. And suddenly Reddit became a safe place where distant others and avatars, because on Reddit you're anonymous, could give you the closeness and the support that the external world could not give you. And there are really touching. I spent some time reading on different subreddits, the comments, the way in which people spoke about their interior life and their situation in their digital bubble. And it's touching how close those people and those avatars felt to each other during this month. So I think it's impossible to define what can be absorbed and what not. There is not a list. There are a set of functions of media and what they can help you to get out or get in, and then case by case they evolve their operations to answer to perform these functions.
So there's been this conversation for a very long time about like human behavior in cyberspace in general. There seems like there's this extension of human ego, so to speak, within the cyber world in general. A few years ago, well, that may be quite a few years ago now, maybe 7, 8 years ago, we did this sort of branding and campaign for an event for technology event, and what we did was we explored exactly like the sense of self in cyberspace, and all that came to mind is that it seemed, at least at that point, like we project a completely different sense of ourselves online versus in the physical world. And the way that we treated that visually was to create as many reflective sort of materials as possible. And we went as far as like having posters that had some Arduino in it. And then every time you approach, a reflective paper would change its shape. So you would see a different self every time that you moved, meaning in every aspect. So let's say on X versus on Facebook versus on Reddit versus on Fortnite, on each of these, you project a different type of yourself. And then it became almost a meme with those pictures of what my picture is on Tinder, what my picture is on LinkedIn, what my picture is on Facebook, etc., etc. At the same time, this has been discussed a lot about all of these sort of Twitter trolling and all the cyberbullying, which is a lot more extreme than it seems to be in the physical realm. What does it say for us as society, combining these worlds, and for the younger generation as well? Does that mean that, well, how do we treat our sort of maturity as human beings while we're being more and more while we're connecting these two worlds more and more? Because it seems like once we had an option to go in, we went to kind of the extreme. And then you're mentioning the Reddit aspect. When we got some maturity, in fact, it helped for the other better side of it. So in Reddit, people created these communities when they really needed them, right? So where are we going, and how do we navigate as human beings this sort of constant push and pull between the physical and digital world?
Yeah, brilliant question. Thanks, Leo. I mean, let's think again with McLuhan media as the extension of men. Of course, media extend to us, and we extend to media constantly. And by doing so, a lot of, as we were saying, a lot of elements are consciously or unconsciously transported. And very often it happens in this process that you let something be ingested by another world. It doesn't matter if it's digital or external. You let something enter and be sedimented there until the point where you essentially build an alter ego, another self of yourself. I mean, in my experience, when sometimes I steal my Facebook page, I still find my page with my skis in France that was taken probably 10 years ago, and I sometimes see what I wrote because the app reminds you what you posted maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And sometimes I think, really, but was it me writing this, or is it this an old version of me, or it's still? Of course, you are confronted with seeing different selves of yourself, and this has, of course, very sweet reconciliation sometimes, because it's sweet to see what I was thinking and doing. But on the other hand, at a broader scale, it creates a fragmentation between identities, of course, or a confusion between them. Still on Reddit, it was so mind-opening for me. There was a user. She referred to herself as a woman, and she was saying, during the pandemic, help, I don't know anymore what to do in my life because I'm constantly at the laptop. Help me creating a list of things that I can do to get outside of the screen and to enjoy again the life outside. And she asked how to go outside to the inside. So she asked to Reddit how to help herself going outside, which is like taking more of a sickness to get a medicine. And this revealed to me a confusion in this user, probably because of course I will need to investigate in that, but it suggests a confusion between what you need to ask from a digital world and what you need to. So essentially, where is the problem and where is the solution? And I think this is just a topical example, but the problematics linked with the fragmentation of the self, especially for the generations, I think I can say like yours and mine, which really lived in a moment where many of these platforms were created, were established, exploded, and became. We just grew up with organic growth of many of Meta, many of TikTok platforms, and we probably were not conscious of the effects they were having.
Mhm. And I think so. To dive a little further on this, the fragmentation of the self is very fundamental, a fundamental aspect of our self-development, I think, moving forward. And here, again, I'm taking a very broad tandem here, but I think it was Seth Godin that said brands are stories that we give people to tell themselves about themselves, something similar to this. And I hope I'm not butchering it. And brands use all of these media, which in turn fragment the self in bits and pieces. A brand, if my estimation is correct, but well, a brand tries to unify the media into a single message. So in a sense, it tries to bring all of the fragments of yourself and tell all of those fragments a story, to give all of those fragments a story for you to tell yourself about yourself. That said, it speaks to how powerful the brand is to the human behavior. Now, knowing this power that we have, and in particular, in your case, you have a power over a global community of people. It could be, we could call them community, or maybe it's not a community because they're sub communities, but nonetheless living under a single brand. How do we navigate, and what are some of the tips I would say to keep in mind when we think about a global brand and a message, shifting human behavior on a global scale while managing this fragmentation of the self across the media? Because I think as designers, media is fundamentally, well, Marshall McLuhan, right? The media is the message. And so we're practically using the media, all of these different fragments of media, to still push out a single message and change human behavior to its core. How do we navigate this? What are some of the tips that we need to have in mind when we're looking at this? And what do you think are the sort of the correlation, the outputs of that behavior change in humans from us as brand leaders?
Clear. Thank you very much for the question, Leon. I think my short answer will be to be always concerned with building and maintaining an open world of your brand. So we mentioned the fragmentation of the self, which is not necessarily negative. It can just be the multiplication of who you are depending on the moments of your life or the world in which you are dwelling. The same, so respectively, needs to happen on the brand level. So also the brands needs to be able to fragment and to multiply. I think looking at Red Bull, let's be fair on how genius gives you wings is. It's a claim that describes our brand, and everybody can uh, build their own enunciation and their own interpretation of what gives you wings means. And it's a claim that is able to fragment the brand into every playground, every user, every consumer moment, occasion, or need that they have. And in that way, the energy drink becomes not just a way to um, get a bit of energy and boost your energy during your day, but it becomes a metaphorical moment that helps you to get out a bit out of yourself and to reach a moment in which you think you are giving yourself wings. And this is, I mean, for many people out there, that's what a can of Red Bull represents. And I think it's very important also here if we refer to anthropology, which is it's an important field for designers, I think, because it really suggests how culture making happens. He describes in a book about symbolical processes how I think it was in Panama, there were some Aboriginal cultures where when women struggled to give birth to kids, there were some shamans who were singing certain songs, and these songs had a capacity to transport the woman into another dimension where suddenly they were able to they were supported or they found their own strength to then give birth. And this is a beautiful explanation to what also in a way more, let's say, mundane necessity a brand needs to do, because it needs to always transport consumers visually, acoustically, symbolically with a claim into another dimension where another self of the consumer can be found and can be experienced. Of course, the aim is to build positive feelings and positive reconnections when you enter this symbolical world. I think that's ultimately the scope of branding. It's building an open and coherent world which you can believe and where you can find another self of yourself that you are happy to meet again.
Also, apparently, is to be a shaman. Guys,
Yes,
we're starting a
I love
religion.
shaman. I love fantasy, so it's a beautiful. Yeah, it's true. We need to be shamans, and because we mentioned brand identity in this call a couple of times, but if I may correct myself, I think it's the time to speak about brand identities. So Red Bull has many identities. It's impossible to define what Red Bull is because it changes depending on what which song the shaman is singing.
Exactly. And well, look, if we're saying that we're shamans, right? And again, for anyone listening, it's a bit of a joke, but it does have some symbolism in it.
I
For
imagine
those
a
of
business card with brand shaman. I would love it. So I will sign that. I might ask Red Bull. Yeah.
well, trademark it right away. And also, I'm gonna clip just that bit of the clip and say Stefano Masserini has said brands are, we are shamans.
Yeah, it's okay. It's
And
totally
completely misuse it because we were talking about that fragmentation of the self. I'll talk about the fragmentation of the video and cyberbullying now. But
totally taking out the context and yeah.
exactly. So to that degree, in fact, like honestly, I think you're very correct in mentioning, or in correlating brands to shamans, because ultimately we're changing that story of that the person tells themselves about themselves, and that changes their behavior and their mindset. And that brings out quite some ethical questions, doesn't it? So, because we could be doing that for for not so good companies, put that way. I don't think that there's some sort of ethical grounds where us as society have said, well, that's what we agree upon. At least in the last sort of decades, and also with sort of the advent of internet and all of the technology, more and more these ethical grounds are becoming more and more ambiguous. The aspect of globalism, cross-cultural pollination has also brought a lot of these sort of ambiguities. Um, do you think that we should sort of start working on a global sort of set of ethical grounds that we agree on in our branding sort of umbrella, so that these shamans, most of the time, they kind of had an understanding within their small societies on what is allowed and what's not allowed, so to speak. um, are we supposed to do something like that, or will that turn into dogma, or some sort of totalitarian brand regime? But at the same time, how what's the playing rules here? Because I'm struggling to see that, and I can often see brands that are using this for the contrary of what I believe should be used as. And so, where do we stand there?
Yeah, I mean it's an important question. At the same time, I think I will struggle to give a complete answer because I don't know. But when thinking at the ethical borders of world building or branding, I often refer or think at Disney and the world that Disney has built. I mean, Disney is a huge company that shaped the imaginary world of of millions of kids around the world, and continues to do so. And I strongly suggest to the audience here to give a look at what Adorno from the Frankfurt School wrote about Disney in a couple of his works. Well, of course, you can insert all of a sudden all of the cute worlds that Disney established and the aesthetics and the stories into in the industrialization of kids' imagination. They became an industry. They were, let's say, unified. And of course, you can go on and build a critique about this. I mean, as shamans, we creatives, I think not just brand managers, but creatives in large, we have a certain power to shape new links between different worlds and to transport people where we want. And if we transport them with a financial need in the end, then of course you industrialize the creative, you create a creative industry. But pragmatically, this is out there and it has always been. And I believe the ethical answers on how to build a conscious branding impact out there needs to be found in the individual. So of course we need to be good citizens, but I don't think that a list of a mos maiorum of branding would bring us anywhere, because branding is just a way to approach a problem, and sometimes it's how we write the briefing also that impacts how we answer. It's it wouldn't be enough to write a list of variables. Of course, every word, even we spoke about Reddit. Reddit has a list of values called etiquette, like etiquette, which every user should attain to, and it's important to remind ourselves that we have a power. This yes. So maybe it's sometimes it's in the universities. It's important to remind that designers have a certain magical power, like shamans, and we need to be careful with it, of course. But ending with a more positive note, it might be true that Disney, in that case, massified and created a unification imagination of kids. But on the other hand, how many sweet memories we can all think about when watching a Disney movie with our as kids, or with kids, or just in an evening where we need to feel a bit cozy. So you can see things. It's the use you make of things that define what they are sometimes, not necessarily their own essence.
Well, to end then on a positive note, although I do have a technical question at the end, just for the listeners, but I will add a question here. Let me see if I can formulate it. This is um, if there would be sort of a perfect way or space for you to work and to do the work that you do on a global level, what would that world look like? So, you're the global head of brand at a huge company. Currently, you face a lot of challenges. What would you say are the biggest challenges that you see, as more so as a professional than for that specific company? So, as a professional, and what would that world look like if sort of these challenges were taken away? And maybe we kind of at least paint a picture of what we would love this world to look like. Uh, and leave that on a positive note.
I believe the challenges that I face is at work is to of course find the ways to create a global message for multiple communities. And if we found ways to make these cultural niche or subcultures to use the differences as a power to express creative diversity instead of dividing themselves. And if the wings that Red Bull gives could become a way to inspire connections and cross community interchange rather than seeing sometimes those communities on certain topics really going far away and opposing instead of merging, that would be nice. I think coming from the free skiing community, which has been at the beginning of our call, and it's nice to end with that, the feelings you have about it. Let's think when you are in a snow park and you see someone landing a trick, and the entire snow park, people on the chairlift, they just claim for this person, and they're happy that he or she achieved something. And this same joy, like communal joy, is with Red Bull. I travel the world attending skateboarding event, breakdancing event, surfing event, skydiving events, you name it. And it's everywhere. It's a unifier. Every of these communities create a sort of negotiation of joy that could be taken as a way to create a cross campaign that speaks to all of them. And I think if I manage to, let's take a tweak that I think if you ask me among the 3 happiest moments of my life, is for sure the first time I landed a backflip with my skis. If I was able to express that feeling across many of these action sports or subcultures, I think I would find a better external world afterwards.
Well, so I'll make this as a call for anyone who's listened to us all the way to the end, to whoever has a solution to bring sort of communities together, or that knows how to do a good backflip. Let's talk to Stefano.
Yes.
So that said, can you just give us like a few things that you would suggest that people who've sort of listened so far, some good reads, some good podcasts, or like books or movies to watch, that they can sort of get influenced by what you've said today as well? And then if you'd like how could people reach you out? What would be the best way to connect with you?
So a few suggestions. Let's look into different media forms. A book, as I heard from you, we are speaking to many designers. The book that made me decide to study design as opposed to engineering was from a very wise, I would say, Italian designer called Bruno Munari. And he just explains the difference between artist and designer. I think the book is titled Artista e Designer, so artist and designer. And it really explains in a down-to-earth way why designers should be considered different than artists and what they have a different roles. I think artists, in following his book, are more, I don't know, pilgrims and mages, and we are shamans. We still need to connect words. We just don't need to present the beautiful word we have in our head like artists. And this has been an important book for me. Then I already suggested a couple of other books, but going to movies, we are in a fast-paced world. Maybe I see it even more from a global headquarter. Sometimes a bit too fast, and sometimes creativity needs his time. And very often when I work on budget files, I find myself listening again to the soundtrack of one of my favorite movies called Barry Lyndon from Stanley Kubrick. And it's a slow movie. It takes more than 3 hours, if I'm not wrong. And it's visually, many of the scenes are inspired from paintings. And it's just visually, take yourself sometimes the time to access aesthetics, because this is a masterpiece movie. I will tell it to everyone. And the third one, let's take maybe a painting from Friedrich, The Wanderer Above the Nebelsee in German, the Sea of Fog. I don't know, the Wanderer of the
Sea of Fog,
yeah,
the
thank you.
Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog.
Exactly. Yeah, we are confronted with a beautiful and infinite world. It's a very romantic painting, and sometimes, I mean, of course, we are here discussing contemporaneity and postmodernity, but it's also nice to remember that we can just go on a mountain, look outside, and there is a beauty of fog in front of us. And on your second part of the question was, now I forgot it because I'm
it's just
looking at
where
fog.
where people could connect with you if you know.
LinkedIn is a good way. I think I would say LinkedIn, so just reach out.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Well, Stefano.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Stefano, well, I've taken a lot of your time. I could go on and on, but I mean, really, this type of conversation and your knowledge is something that I'm very like fascinated with. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be pestering you a lot longer after the call. So I really appreciate your time and what you've shared with us today. And yeah, for everyone listening, thank you so much for having gone all the way through this. And feel free to hit the like and share button, and send me a DM or leave some comments below, and let's continue this conversation.
Thank you very much, Leod. As said, I was touched by your messages, and I'm really grateful that you gave me this opportunity to be here with you and a distant audience to have a beautiful and enjoyable conversation. Thank you. It was very inspiring for me too.